Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. This is the first of two webinars we're hosting this week, with the second one being on Thursday morning at 11:30. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 regulations, we can't host our annual series of county seminars. So pretty much like everybody else, we've decided to go online for 2021. That said, what this format does allow us to do, it allows us to bring contributions from literally all over the country. So we have contributions from Cork up as far as Donegal. And we also have a variety of speakers and topics. We have the environment, we have agronomy, we have schemes, we have topics around Brexit. And we also have a variety of contributors. We have farmers, we have advisors, we have specialists, researchers, and we also have some of our colleagues from the industry as well. So hopefully you'll find something very interesting and engaging over the next 2 days. The format of the webinar this morning will be, we will have 3 technical presentations, and after those technical presentations, which will last about 15 minutes apiece, we will have a live discussion with a panel of experts from around the country. So at that stage then, I'd ask you to get involved. There's a chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so please use that to ask us questions, and I can then put the questions to our different panelists. Without further ado, we'll get into our presentations. But before we get into our technical presentations, Michael Hennessy recently caught up with our new Head of Knowledge Transfer, Stan Lawler, to talk about Teagasc's commitment to the tillage sector.
And you're very welcome, Stan, and certainly congratulations on your appointment as the Head of Knowledge Transfer in Teagasc. Stan, your remit is very wide. It extends from education across the advisory service, and certainly within the advisors is even very broad. It goes from areas from poultry to cows and back into tillage. Where do you see Teagasc's commitment in terms of their support to tillage farmers in the coming years?
Yeah, it's a very good question to start with, Michael, and I suppose thanks very much for the welcome as well. I'm delighted to be back in Teagasc after being away for a few years, and certainly to come back into the role I'm in. As you say, it's a very broad remit, and certainly it's a big challenge because you've highlighted there, it does cover a huge number of areas. But I think it's very clear. Tillage is a critical sector to the agri and farming sector in the country, and I wouldn't be under any illusion in terms of the commitment we have in Teagasc to it. It mightn't be, in terms of area of land use or that it mightn't be as big as some of the other sectors we have, like beef or dairy, but as a sector in its own right and what we can do and the opportunities we have in that sector, it's absolutely critical that we give it, the correct attention in terms of trying to develop it and grow it and service the farmers and the clients we have in the business. And so I mean, there's no doubt it will continue, has been and will continue to be a priority area for Teagasc and its KT efforts in the future. I suppose around that, we do have 14 designated tillage advisors across the regions. Now that number would be, I suppose, small compared to some of the other enterprises, but I think one thing that's very important in the tillage service that we have is, those advisors in their own right are they're designated to tillage and they're very specialised on tillage expertise. But in the background, we have, exceptionally strong support, in terms of specialist service and also linkages back to the research and the linkages, I suppose, an advantage of that group being relatively small is those linkages are very well integrated and very tight, and we do have very good upward and downward flow in terms of communication and information from farmers through advisors up to research and back in the other direction, and that really is key to the delivery of an effective service. And trying to harness that in the future will be something we'll be looking very much at. And I think as well as that, how that interacts with stakeholders. I mean, we're very careful and very aware of the fact that we don't want to be just operating at what we think is right, but we want to take feedback from our stakeholders, particularly our farmers, but also other stakeholders in the industry as well, because that's how we identify the needs, it's how we identify the opportunities, and that's how we can put the research in the first instance and then the knowledge transfer programs in place to deliver that need where that's there. The other thing that I would just stress is the independence of our advice and the service is really, it's such a critical cornerstone of what we do in Teagasc, particularly with some of the challenges that are coming up in the industry. Having that independent whole farm approach in terms of the advisory service we can deliver is critical as well. Final point I just make, Michael, on that one in terms of the program we deliver, I'd be very conscious, and I do want to acknowledge, we get a lot of support from our farmers in terms of joint programs, monitor farms, and a lot of active participation with our advisors in the field and that helps us in terms of tweaking the service and providing the information out as well. And I would acknowledge all of those people who engage so proactively and positive with us, because, that's a very important part of what we can do as well.
Yeah, you mentioned, Stan, some of the challenges that are there, and there's certainly plenty of challenges for tillage farmers. Income certainly being one of the major ones. Certainly lagging behind dairy is the star at the moment, but there's also other challenges there as well. There's declining tools, in terms of certainly from plant protection products out there. There's certainly less of them, and there's environmental issues coming up. How do you see, or how do you think our tillage advisors can help farmers cope with these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there's huge challenges there, Michael, and I mean, it's no different than any other period, I suppose, in recent decades, where there's always been opportunities and challenges, across the way in terms of what we can do. What we have to do is remain relevant and remain, that we can react to those challenges as they come up. And that goes back to the key aspect of the advisory service, and where I think we have a very important role to play is not only in our independence, but in our holistic view of the whole farm system. And that we can really, where the advisory service and where the knowledge transfer wants to position itself and be relevant to farmers, is in tying in all of these various aspects in terms of what's right and what's the right way forward for the whole farm. You can get advice on individual issues, you can get advice on individual products or technologies and things like that, but I suppose a key part of what we're trying to do in Teagasc is bring that together in terms of the whole farm plan and the whole farm program and the whole farm development, in as much as just the individual one by one issues as well. And and that's where I think a lot of these things come together, whether it's the plant protection products, where it's some of the environmental issues, even in terms of the program we put together even for this seminar, highlight some of that in terms of the broad range of issues from that comes into we have alternative crops in terms of, I think, a section on beans. We have trying to integrate organic manures into the system. We're looking at some of where the environmental schemes kick in, and all of those things I think are very important in trying to help the farmer see through all these issues and actually chart a course in terms of the business plan or the development plan for each individual farm. And that's what we want to be front and center with, in being an enabler and an aid to the farmer in that way.
Yeah, I think you're right, Stan. It's something that's we try very hard. I think out there we train advisors quite a lot in terms of it's not just about a single issue; it's how that fits into the entire farming system, and that's very important. And we keep driving that message as much as we can. As you rightly say, it's in as part of this series. And when we're talking about this series, I suppose the COVID crisis has forced us to go online, the same as a lot of things. We're all back in lockdown yet again, and I suppose Teagasc are doing things very differently, but it's also affecting how advisors are interacting on a day-to-day basis with farmers. From your point of view, leading this very big service, what sort of measures do you think are in place, or we're going to put in place, I suppose, to make sure that we maintain that excellent relationship between the advisor and the farmer?
Yeah, no, I think, look, at the last 9 months or so with the COVID crisis has been a huge challenge for many. It's been a challenge for, I suppose, everybody personally, both in terms of within Teagasc, but across society. It's been a big challenge organisationally, and Teagasc has had to react to that, and that's no different than so many other aspects of life which have happened. But it has been how we've reacted, I suppose, has been a challenge, but it's also been an opportunity, because it's been a chance to look at new ways of doing things. And I think I'd be very proud and I think it's been a good opportunity to experiment, I suppose, in more intensely with some of the online and digital tools and digital content. I mean, even seminars like this one moved online. We have, we've seen even local advisors, I've been delighted to see the amount of even the likes of video content produced from local advisors. And we see a huge reaction from clients in terms of viewership on those clips when they're localized like that and made relevant on the ground to local issues in certain areas and so on. The other thing that I would say is, as a service, we have remained fully available and continue to work and deliver on the needs of the clients. I mean, I want to commend, I suppose I'd have to commend the work of my colleagues in the advisory service in this regard, particularly, not having the face-to-face content and as much face-to-face contact, and I suppose that traditional way of that we consider advisors working, but There's been a huge amount of work done on the phone between, moving the likes of discussion groups and seminars online. It's been an opportunity to develop things like podcasts. We have the Tillage podcast now, which is becoming well established. We have, and the ongoing work you'll be familiar with in terms of the newsletters, the website. Those who are subscribing to the crop reports will have seen that those have continued, unchanged. Articles in today's farm, and all of those regular activities have continued in the background as well. And I suppose it just highlights, the work of Teagasc is the face-to-face contact is very, very important, but there's a huge amount of work going on in the background as well. And we've enabled and continue to do all that in the process as well. And I think, as I say, the last 9 months, while it's been a challenge to deliver that, it has been an opportunity to actually experiment and explore some of these maybe alternative ways of doing things. And again, I commend the work of the advisors, but I'd also highlight and commend and appreciate our clients who have adapted to maybe receiving some of this information slightly different. And that's been important as well, because that has enabled us to get on and continue to do the job.
Stan, thanks very much for your time today. I'm delighted you could join us, and for your forthright views in terms of how we're going to service the advisory area for tillage farmers. I certainly want to wish you every success in your new role, and look forward to working with you over the next number of years. So that's it for now, and I'll hand you back to the studio.
So thanks, Michael and Stan, for that. I suppose it's great to see Teagasc's commitment to the tillage sector for the years ahead. So our first technical presentation this morning is around varieties and seed rates. So recently, Mark Trimble, our tillage advisor in Kilkenny, spoke to Eleanor O'Gorman from the Cereal Evaluation Trials in Kildalton about the recently published recommended list for cereals. And Eleanor gives us a good insight into the pros and cons of each of the individual varieties, and takes us through some of the figures that are involved, and highlights some of the issues that might not necessarily come to the fore on first glance. Mark also then talks to Larry Murphy about seed rates and establishing our crops well. And Larry gives us some insight into where he thinks farmers can improve when they're trying to sow their seeds this spring.
Okay, I'm joined this morning by Eleanor O'Gorman from the Department of Agriculture. And Eleanor, you're over the trial plots in Kildalton College.
That's right. Yeah, I'm in Kildalton, and I have colleagues then that are based in Backweston and in Ballydown. So there's three main centres, and then we would have trials on commercial farms and throughout the country as well.
Okay, sure. We'll just have a run through the recommended list of the spring cereal varieties here. So starting with spring barley, there's one change to the list there, I think. One drop off.
Yeah, the spring barley list this year, Mark, the variety Limona has come off the list, and while there was 20 varieties on trial this year, there was a number of candidate varieties, so 7 in total. However, none of them made it this year. Now, 3 of those varieties will still come through next year, or we'll be trialling them again this year, should I say. But it was down to seed availability, seed not being propagated, issues with Brexit, maybe COVID was impacted, but there are potential varieties there. But there was a number of varieties that were showing good potential, so we hope to see them again. But just on the varieties that are on the list, Gangway and Planet are the control varieties. Planet is a consistent performer, and Gangway has a good straw strength. The actual ratings on the varieties didn't change either this year in terms of their disease profile or their straw. The 2 that remain provisionally recommended then are Prospect and SY Ardarin. There were some issues later in the year with SY Ardarin with fusarium and splitting, but in terms of there was no changes to the scores. So the list, as I said, there were promises coming through in terms of candidate varieties. The year that came was a low disease year in terms of which can be a challenge in one respect when it comes to evaluating varieties. However, we used 3-year results for the recommended list trials. So 18, 19 and 20 were 3 very, very different years in terms of the challenges that so while we had low disease in 20, what we did have, there was 2 storms coming up coming up to harvest. So the straw was most definitely challenged, and so we were able to get good data in terms of that. Other years then, like 18, the drought year was low yielding year, but as I said, because we're taking 3-year figures, we're able to incorporate all of those. But what the different years does do is it actually it shows how robust those the varieties are in terms of the differences. If a variety remains on the list, it means that they were able to stand up to the challenges of those particular years.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So we're looking at Gangway Planet and Erigal again as the recommended varieties for this year.
That's right. Yeah.
As far as malting varieties go, Laureate is probably the most popular one there. Anything else coming around malting?
The malting list will be released next week. There's no major change to the malting list this year. The 3 varieties that were previously on the list will remain on the list. There's 2 varieties that will be up for recommendation once they've another year in trial done. In terms of ratings, nothing has changed either. Tungsten and there's another variety coming through there that has another year to go on the trial Splendor. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. But in terms of the ratings, and obviously the relative yields will have changed, but there's nothing major there.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Good to hear. There's more varieties coming down the line anyway. Sure. Moving over to spring oats, then there's one change here also, I think.
Yeah, in the spring oats this year. So the variety Keeley is gone. But for the likes of oats, again, there was 12 varieties in trial in 2020. So Keeley has come off the list. There was a candidate variety, KWS Nuage, but that variety was discontinued by the breeder. There was propagation issues, so that's no longer. But there will be other varieties coming through, and once they have their 3 years complete. But in terms of, there is slight changes on the list in terms of ratings. So both the variety Husky and WBP Isabel both were dropped 1 point for mildew, so they went from a 6 down to a 5. And the variety Isabel had an 8 for resistance to lodging, and that has dropped back to 7. Now, it would still be a strong straw strength in terms of, but at the same time, this was a good challenging year in terms of standability in the field, and that has gone to a 7. So other than that, the mainstays on the list, there's Barra and Delphin, Husky, and WBP Isabel. In terms of the ratings, Barra has been there quite some time, there since 1985, and then obviously the other varieties are newer varieties. Husky's still there since 2009 as well. So Isabel and Barra would have very strong grain quality parameters, and in terms of disease package, I suppose Isabel and Husky would remain probably better in terms of as disease package.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Yeah. So over then finally to spring wheat. I suppose a low enough acreage of spring wheat grown, but 1 or 2 changes here. I suppose Chillum is gone from the list, and the 2 provisionally recommended from last year are now fully recommended, but with some changes to the ratings.
Yeah, so the spring wheat list this year, Chillum has been discontinued, as you said. So on the fully recommended now is KWS Starlight and KWS Talisker. So there was 20 varieties actually in trial on the spring wheat list this year. So there was a couple of main changes to Starlight in particular in terms of the ratings. It dropped 3 scores from a 7 down to a 4 for yellow rust, and it also dropped 2 scores from a 7 down to a 5 for sprouting. In terms of we got some good data in terms of yellow rust, particularly in Cork and in Back Weston this year. The other thing then was KWS Talisker was dropped as a score for mildew. It went from a 7 down to a 6. Now there's a new variety that's on as well, Hexam, which is a new variety. In terms of disease scoring, it's quite strong on yellow rust, but it's probably somewhat weaker on mildew and septoria with scores of 5. but they're provisionally recommended scores. So obviously, hopefully another year in trial, we might have more data there. But so that's the spring wheat list this year. Okay,
thanks very much, Eleanor. Sure, it's pretty much as you were, I suppose, in most respects, really. But more varieties coming down the road is the message, really.
Yeah, there's potential there in terms of varieties. The varieties have been given a good challenge there in the last couple of years. What's there? Say they're robust scores in terms of like they're taken from a number of different sites across the country, and like particularly this year, like some areas were more affected by others in terms of rainfall back in April and May. So some sites were higher scoring this year, but we managed to get very good disease data then in other sites. Even though 2020 was a particularly low disease pressure year, like we carry out observation trials where no fungicides are given so that we can still get fairly good disease data in terms of testing these varieties. So while we're not seeing it in the treated plots in the field, that the disease will be coming through in the untreated plots. And all of that data is fed into the recommended list and into those scores.
Great. Okay, thanks very much for all that information, Eleanor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, now I'm joined by my colleague Larry Murphy from Teagasc in Wexford, and we're going to have a look at seeding rates and crop establishment. Okay, Larry, so what factors influence yield in spring barley?
Thanks, Mark. Yield is mainly influenced by grain number per metre squared, and grain number per metre squared is heavily influenced by ear number. So our objective with spring barley is to achieve as many ears per square metre as we can for maximum yield.
Okay, and so a lot of that comes back to seeding rates. So what are the main factors then that growers need to know when it comes to seeding rates?
Well, there's three factors, Mark, involved in determining the correct seeding rate. That is the 1,000 grain weight, your target plant population, and the establishment percentage. Okay, and so yeah, the first one you mentioned there, 1,000 grain weight. What is that, and what's the significance of it? 1,000 grain weight is the weight of 1,000 grains in grams. This is displayed normally on the bag when the seed is delivered. Now, it can vary between varieties and within varieties and between lots. So it's very important that the seed that's delivered to your yard, that you know what the 1,000 grain weight is for that batch of seed.
Okay, and it's displayed on the bag of seed, like you said. So the next one.
In most situations,
Sorry, go on.
In most situations it is, but if it's not, you should be able to find that out by contacting your merchant, and he'll get it for you.
Okay. So the second one you said was the target plant stand. So what should we be aiming for there?
Well, if you take that spring barley, 90% of it is sold between mid-March and mid-April. We're looking at a target plant stand of 300 plants per metre squared. And that's based on the tillering capacity and look, we're looking for a plant stand of around, or a number of stems of 1,000 to 1,100 stems per square metre, and generally you get something like 3 to 3¼ stems per seed sowed. So like that's where we come up with this 300 plants. If you're sowing earlier, you do something like 280, and if you're sowing late, mid-April or after mid-April, you're looking at a higher plant stand because the crop grows through its growth stages much faster.
And the early sown crops tiller a bit more than the later sown ones.
That's correct, yeah, Mark.
So the third one then is the establishment percentage, and is there a big variation in that, or what are the ranges there?
Well, what I'm finding is that we're overestimating our plant establishment. Generally, we do our figures on 85% because all seed has to be a minimum of 85% germination, but that's generally in the high 90s. but we're not taking into account other factors such as poor seed beds, leather jacket or crow damage, or even the weather that comes after sowing. So invariably, like when you walk into a crop and you think it's a good crop, but when you actually do a plant count, it's below your target of 300. So I think and we found out with our groups, they're doing plant counts that a lot of crops end up emerging in the high 70s and even into the low 70s. So like, I think that's the one that farmers will have to do their own calculations on and factor that in, because to me, the other two are a given. You know your 1,000 grain weight, you know that your target plant stand is 300. So the one variable there that's open to the grower to determine is what establishment rate he's working off. So like they're put into a formula like the 1,000 grain weight multiplied by the target plant stand divided by the percentage establishment will give you your seeding rate.
Yeah, and that's available in kilos per hectare as well as stone per acre, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. If it's in kilos per hectare, if you want to find out the stones per acre, you divide by 15.7.
Okay, so like that was, I was supposed to be focused on spring barley there. Is it the same formula for calculating it for spring wheat and spring oats?
Yeah, the figures change. Like obviously, the target plant stand will change for wheat and oats. It's somewhat different. You're looking at around 350 seeds in that situation, but the other two remain the same.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Larry. I think that covers all that very well. Thank you.
Again, thanks to Mark, Eleanor and Larry for that. some interesting comments there on the varieties and seed rates and establishment. Our next section deals with the new straw incorporation scheme that is due to be launched by the Department of Agriculture in the coming weeks and months. In this section, Phelim MacDonald, our tillage advisor here in Oak Park, talks to Patrick Mulhall, who has a long experience of incorporating straw into his fields in Carlow. And Phelim looks at the benefits of that incorporation of the straw into the soil. We also have Dermot Forrestal, our researcher here in Oak Park, who talks about the practical aspects of incorporating straw into your soil.
So I'm on Patrick Mulhall's farm here in Tullow, County Carlow today. Hard frost, but nonetheless we're out investigating the effects of straw chopping that he has experienced over the last number of years. So Patrick, I'd ask you first of all, what prompted you to start chopping straw on your farm here?
Well, I suppose when we lost the sugar beet and we became growing all the cereal crops, we kind of noticed that the crops were deteriorating over the years, and start looking to find answers why, and we turned to soil health as a big reason. So we started chopping straw and incorporating at the time.
And Patrick, what are the main benefits that you've seen either to the soil structure or to the crops that you're taking off the farm following your years of chopping straw?
Well, certainly in the soil you can see great improvement in structure, huge improvement in earthworm numbers, which is going to give you better soil structure, and reduced costs also. You know, I'm down the road quite a few years now, and yeah, I definitely have reduced my P&K inputs on the farm, and I put that down to a number of things, and chopping straw being one of them. Yeah.
Okay, so Patrick has told us about the benefits and the reasons that he's chopping straw. So we've dug a little pit here just to have a look inside and underneath the ground to see what we can see. Now it's a very frosty day today, so the first inch or inch and a half of the soil is still frozen, and we can't determine an awful lot of the structure because of that. But certainly what a lot of farmers are doing is they're doing this VES, which is a visual evaluation of soil structure. We dig a little hole here, and then we take a block out adjacent to it, and we put it onto a surface here, and we examine the soil structure. And as you can see, as soon as I put it on, it sort of broke up very, very nicely. If we had put that on it and it hadn't broken up at all, as a slab of ground, it would not be a good sign. But this soil is absolutely beautiful structure here. The top of it breaks up quite nicely with one hand. We don't require too much effort to break up that soil. So the structure is very nice, a lovely crumb structure, lots of earthworms as well in there. And if we look a little bit closer inside the pit, we will be able to see a couple of zones. This first zone here, which is about 10-15 centimeters, would be a rooting zone, and we can see the roots here. There's winter wheat zone here. It's only maybe 6 or 8 weeks sown, 8 weeks sown I suppose. And we can also see quite a number of little pores here, and they're the burrows of the earthworms. There's a lot of earthworm activity. So that zone here is very, very active, and Patrick and I are putting this down. An awful lot of the benefit of straw chopping can be seen there. Further down here, we still have a lovely crumb structure. It doesn't take much effort to take some of the soil away, so there's no slabbing, there's no compaction in it. The structure is excellent. One of the points that we would make is that the chopping of straw is of benefit to any soil that you have, but in particular the heavier soils where there is more compaction, where the structure isn't as lovely and crummy like that, really does benefit those heavier soils. So the Department of Agriculture this year have announced a straw chopping scheme which will come into effect later on this year. Now it's a €10 million scheme, and if the payment was to be €250 a hectare, that would account for 40,000 hectares. That's 15% of the tillage area in the country. So the chopping of straw obviously gives us a number of benefits. The primary one that people think of is the phosphorus and potash that's being put back into the soil. And a crop of winter oats, say 9 tonnes per hectare, that will give you about 3.6 kilograms of phosphorus going back into the soil and 87 kilograms of potash. And the value to you of that is around €82 per hectare at the moment. The other important one that's become much more to the fore in the last number of years is grass weeds. If you don't need a baler coming in to bale your straw, you will have much less risk of problematic grass weeds such as sterile brome or blackgrass in particular. And they are very, very important issues. So if you're asking yourself the question, well, what are my opportunities for chopping straw? There are a number of them. First and foremost, I suppose, naturally, when straw prices are low due to poor demand, that would be a time to consider making the best use of the nutrient value of that straw by chopping it. Secondly, oaten straw in itself is often trading at a discount, and that would be the first one, I suppose, that most people would consider chopping. After that then, if we're in a difficult autumn or harvest time, when we may have to turn the straw and there may be a number of passes required under difficult soil conditions, it would be a very good idea to have in your mind that you're going to chop a field of straw to avoid that trafficking on poor soils. As I mentioned earlier, on worn soils or difficult or heavy soils, to try and increase the organic matter and get some straw incorporated in there over a number of years. And finally, if you're planning to drill oilseed rape, you would consider chopping straw in order to get in there early.
Why would we consider incorporating straw? We consider incorporating straw to try and improve the soil quality. Straw is about 40% carbon, so when we add it to the soil and mix it with the soil, we're adding carbon to that soil, we're adding to the organic matter of the soil. Organic matter is hugely important in the functioning of the soil. In terms of the physical structure, it's what holds the aggregates together, and it gives us that good crumb structure that makes the soil easy to work, makes it easy for water infiltration, and makes it easier for crops and root structures to grow within. But also it's hugely important to the biological function of the soil, so it allows the nutrient cycling that's absolutely essential for crops to grow. So What's our level of organic matters in soils? That really depends on the crops that we have. Okay. In a recent study in the Square project, a project run by Teagasc, we looked at organic matters in soils, and on grasslands in Ireland they average at about 12%. Because on grassland you have a permanent crop of grass and you have continually renewing root structure, so that's adding to the organic material. Where you have annual crops and in tillage, the threshold or the average rates are much lower. It's about 5%. But 5% organic matter is a perfectly functioning organic matter level in a tillage soil. But we see in that survey that there was a range of organic matters, and some of those are down at a level of about 3.5%. Now that 3.5% equates to about 2% carbon in the soil. Now, while there's not a specific tipping point for all soils, if we saw levels dropping below that 2% or 3.5% organic matter, we would be concerned, and we should really think of adapting management actions that kind of improve the equilibrium of carbon within that soil. So what options have we and how do we look at them? Well, the options may be, to go into grass if you're on a mixed farm, but most tillage farmers are not in that situation. You can think of amendments like farmyard manure or slurry, or incorporating cover crops, or the one we're talking about here, incorporating straw. You can also think maybe of altering your tillage practice, and it might burn off a little bit less of the carbon. How we assess those is by looking at it in the literature. Richie Hackett did some of this work back a number of years ago in the Tillage conference, and we've looked at other reviews since then with some of our own information as well. If we take an example of incorporating straw, if we took a big crop of winter wheat, if we incorporated the straw that we'd normally bale, we'd probably add somewhere in the region of 6.5 tonnes of straw per hectare. Okay, 40% of that is carbon, and if we put it in the soil, we'd retain about 20% in the soil. So the net gain per year per hectare would be about 500 kilos of carbon into the soil. That sounds like a good figure, and it is. It's better than not adding any. But if you think of the working area of soil as being the top, say, 20 centimetres, and if you looked at how much soil there is in a hectare, there's over 3,000 tonnes of soil, and we're adding annually 0.5 of a tonne of carbon. So the net gain is quite small. But if we do it for a generation, for 30 years, we incorporate straw rather than not, we might move, an additional, or bring an additional 0.5% of carbon into the soil. That 0.5% is not insignificant. And considering, there are other actions which are depleting soil carbon, it will certainly should help retain the levels of carbon in the soil. But don't expect huge gains in short times. It's a long and slow process. How does that compare with other additions or other amendments? Well, if we take farmyard manure, for example, if we added 20 tonnes per hectare, an application in an annual basis of 20 tonnes per hectare, the net carbon addition would be about 300 kilos per hectare. If we applied slurry, pig slurry for instance, one application, 25 cubic metres per hectare, would certainly add to the organic nutrients, and we'd see a benefit from that. But in terms of organic carbon, we'd be only adding about 60 kilos of carbon per hectare. If we looked at cover crops, it depends totally on how much material you produce. If you got your cover crop sown real early, after winter barley, and produce maybe 3 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, incorporated that, you'd have about 240 kilos of carbon added to the soil. So in those contexts, straw incorporation does stand up reasonably well. Does the type of straw matter? Well, there are some differences. For instance, if we look at winter or with oaten straw or oilseed rape straw, they have high lignin contents, and because of that, the carbon will be retained longer in the soil. So certainly, from a carbon sequestration point of view, they'll have some extra benefit by using high lignin straws in that case. Farmers often ask, are there other benefits, more short-term benefits from incorporating straw? Does the soil become more workable? Well, a review of the literature would indicate that those benefits do come, but it takes probably 6 to 8 years for those to be measurable in any sort of meaningful way. So the benefits are there, but it takes some time for those to come. So overall, the incorporation of straw, certainly from a soil perspective, can help soil quality and can be a positive benefit there. But the increments that it brings are very, very small, and it takes time to happen. And you need to take all of this into consideration when making that decision as to whether you're going to incorporate straw or use it from some other use.
Okay, thanks again to Phelim, to Patrick and to Dermot for those interesting comments on straw incorporation. Our next section deals with the environment, and it's in two sections. The second section is a very interesting project that's ongoing in Kildare at the moment. And Ivan Whitten from Teagasc and Naas and Sorla Kavanagh from Biodiversity Ireland will talk about the Kildare pollinator plan. But we're going to start first with our GLAS scheme. As you know, GLAS has been rolled over for 2021. So John Brophy, our tillage advisor in Drogheda, talks about the implications for those farmers who are rolling over from previous GLAS schemes into 2021.
Good morning and welcome. Today we're going to have an overview look at GLAS and the extension that was available for GLAS there at the end of 2020. So what is GLAS? So GLAS is a 5-year environmental scheme, and it was designed to promote environmentally friendly practices. And some of these practices are biodiversity, to sequester carbon, reduce nitrate losses and protect waterways and habitats. And GLAS was designed so that farmers were reimbursed for the cost of completing an action or the loss or production, or the loss of the production due to that action. GLAS Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 commenced in January 16 for most farmers, and they were eligible for the 1-year rollover extension in December 2020. GLAS Tranche 3 commenced in January 2017, and there was 1 year remaining on their contract anyway. So the GLAS extension then, so it was for Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 participants only. And Tranche 1 and 2 got a chance to roll over their contracts for an extra year in December in 2020. This was either done via text or online in December in 2020. So what does this mean? So all contracts that were rolled over had to accept the GLAS terms and conditions and must complete their GLAS actions as in the past. Some actions are no longer eligible for payment as they're compulsory under the new nitrates. An example of these would have been low emission slurry spreading and protection of water courses. Nutrient management plans should also be kept updated with out-of-date samples needing replacement and any new land being farmed to be sampled also. Nutrient management plans don't need to be resubmitted to the department but should be kept up to date on the farm at all times. So just a note there, I'm just going to put up a note there that the department have on their terms and conditions and the specifications, and just talking about the extension period. Basically, it's what they're telling us there is anyone that the specifications of Tranche 1 and 2 participants and all related circulars must be adhered to in full. And that's going to include maintaining, repairing, replacing as appropriate, and continuing management practices and rotations as set out in the documents for the duration of the extension. And records must be maintained annually for the duration of the extended contract and for 3 months after the end of the last contract. More information can be got on the department and the agricultural page on www.gov.ie. The actions then, so some typical actions then for a tillage farmer are, so catch crops, environmental management of fallow land, arable margins, wild bird cover, and this must remain in situ until the 15th of March of the following year, which will be 2022. Mint hill, grey partridge in selected areas, basically North Dublin and Bura in Offaly. Traditional hay meadow, low input permanent pasture, but you must have own livestock on the farm and continue to do so. Protection and maintenance of archaeological monuments. There is other actions there as well, but that's just a brief view of some of the typical actions for a tillage farm. So some of these actions may be a priority action. So a loss of these may mean termination from the scheme. So just be careful that all actions are done. These actions must be managed as in the past and as per terms and conditions of the scheme. So there's no changes to how they're managed, but it must be done as you have been doing them in the past. All receipts for work done and seed purchase should be kept for extension duration and for 3 months afterwards. And a record of all the actions should be maintained for the extension for 3 months afterwards and recorded in the GLAS records booklet. Catch crops are notified again on the BPS online as they have been in other years. So the nutrient management plan, we'll have a look at that now. So that needs to be, you need to check the nutrient management plan and update then where possible. So all nutrient management plans and the use of NNP on farm should be in line with the latest nitrates directive. So what to check on the farm for your nutrient management plan? So is all land declared on BPS on the NNP, on your NNP plan? Is the plan in line with the latest BPS or your BPS to be declared for the coming year? Is all land sampled? Any new land added to the farm since updating the NNP should also be sampled. All samples dated before the 15th of the 9th, 2016 needs to be updated as these are now out of date. Plots with no samples need to be sampled. And our land-based GLAS actions on the plan, so make sure that if you have wild bird cover or catch crops or fallow, that they are actually mentioned on the NMP plan and they're marked in on the map as to where they should be. New soil sampling rules since 2018, so all land is to be sampled. Soil sample to represent approximately 4 hectares, but no greater than 5 hectares. Soil sample only lasts for 4 years. Soil samples to be mapped and the location of each soil sample identified on the map. So a few frequently asked questions then. So can I alter my plan? So the answer to that is no, plans can't be altered or changed. So can I move an action such as maybe wild bird cover or min-till? So no, these actions have to remain in situ. So it's the same as above. So can I change the actions? No, there's no option to change actions either. And can I drop or add an action? So there's no option there to drop or add an action to your plan. So what happens if I lose land due to lease expiring? So this is okay once the land is not claimed on the BPS, but payment for this action will be lost. And can I lease out my own land? So if there's a GLAS action on it, the answer there is no, because if you lease it out, then the action may be lost or may mean expulsion from the scheme, which means all monies might be recouped from the start of the scheme. So you need to check out these things with your advisor before you do anything on it. So just a few things to check then. So check all actions are intact, that they are completed or to be completed, or that you're able to complete the actions. Check that you can continue the action for the year ahead and wild bird cover, for example, until the 15th of March 2022. Check that you will continue to clear all lands with GLAS actions on it on the BPS. So if you have any concern regarding actions not completed or unable to complete an action, such as like min-till or catch crops, or any changes in land in the year ahead that will affect GLAS, or if your NMP is out of date, please contact your advisor. Okay, so thanks for listening. So thank you.
Good morning. This morning, we're going to discuss the whole area of protecting farmland pollinators in County Kildare. This exciting project is coordinated by the National Biodiversity Centre, and the operational group includes Trinity College Dublin, Bord Bia, Teagasc, Mocker na Firma, and 4 representatives from the Irish farmers. So Sorla, can you first of all tell us a little bit about the project?
So the project is about identifying small actions on farmland that will allow biodiversity to coexist within a productive farming system. So it aims to help farmers to provide small habitats on their farm that offer food, shelter and safety for pollinators. And when I talk about pollinators, I'm talking about bees and hoverflies, but it will also help farmers to provide benefits to biodiversity on their farms. And I suppose what's really important about this project is that we are working with farmers throughout the process of developing the project. So there's a great consultation process that's occurring. Okay, so look, as the local Teagasc tillage advisor in Kildare for a good few years now, tell me what type of farmers have you got involved in this project? Okay, so it's a 5-year project and we've 40 participant farmers that have been recruited. So 10 of these farms are tillage farms. 10 beef, 10 dairy and 10 mixed farms involved. Okay. Within each farm type, there's a range of intensities. So we've got low inputs, high inputs and low and high outputs as well. Okay. So when you go out to visit a farmer and you're looking at the biodiversity on that particular farm, when I was doing my research there, I came across this exciting scorecard that you've developed for self-appraisal. Can you tell us a little bit about that now? Yeah, definitely. So through the project, we have developed this whole farm pollinator scorecard, and it allows us to reward farmers for the pollinator-friendly management on their farm. And it uses a results-based payment mechanism. So the farmer will receive a score annually, and the score equates to a monetary reward. So we also call it a pollinator score. And again, this scorecard has been developed through consultation with farmers and farming organisations. And I think that really gives the scorecard strength, because the farmers know their farm and know the land better than anybody else. Okay. So when we go into the whole area of habitats on tillage farms, what type of habitats have you came across so far?
So I suppose each of the tillage farms involved in the project are providing some benefit for pollinators. And I think a lot of the time the farmer underestimates the value of their farm for biodiversity and pollinators as a whole. The number of trees, for example, is a great benefit to pollinators and biodiversity. So we have a range of tillage farmers involved in the project, as I mentioned, and some of them are very intensive and some of them aren't. And I suppose that range of intensities is reflected in the pollinator points that the farmer receives on year end. How you manage your hedgerows is probably one of the best ways that you can help pollinators on your farm. So cutting a hedgerow every year offers very little value to biodiversity. Some plants cannot produce flowers if they're cut on an annual basis. So if you have no flowers, there'll be no bees, no fruits, and no fruits, you've no birds. So some farmers choose to cut their hedges every year, but there are others that are cutting them on a 2 or a 3 year rotation. And this is hugely beneficial for pollinators and biodiversity. Hedge margins are another a great one. Other field boundaries, there's lots of different types of field boundaries that may not go into this hedgerow classification. Cover crop, once it is allowed to flower, is beneficial to pollinators. Bird cover, wildflower meadows, no matter how big or small, a sown patch of wildflower seeds is hugely beneficial for pollinators and biodiversity.
So you mentioned the whole area sort of there of tillage margins or arable margins. What are from a biodiversity point of view, what are the do's and don'ts that you would be saying to tillage farmers now at this stage? What have you actually found out so far?
Yeah, so tillage farmers are very interested in sowing margins along the outskirts of their fields. And I suppose they've been in touch with me to ask, what are the best seeds to sow? And I suppose it's dependent on, your own farm and even your specific field, your soil type, how you're planning to sow your seed is going to impact on what seed you would select. I suppose for me personally, I would always choose native Irish seeds to make sure that we're sowing our native species. That way you're less likely of sowing something that could be problematic in the future. And then also, especially for tillage farms, you want to be careful of what seeds you're going to sow because you don't want them to encroach on your crop. And another thing to think about would be the provenance of those seeds. Where are they coming from? And I think that not only choosing a native species of plant to sow, but choosing native provenance is also really important. So to ensure that those seeds were actually sourced in Ireland, and that way there's no potential for introducing new pathogens into the country, for example.
Okay, Sorla, my last question for you this morning is on the whole area of bees and how important they are as pollinators. From a national biodiversity perspective, what have you found out so far on bees within Ireland?
So in terms of the project work that we're carrying out in Kildare, we've conducted 1 year of surveys. So we have our baseline data. So it'll be a matter of going back in 2 years' time to see if the pollinators on the farms have increased or decreased after the farmers have taken actions to help pollinators on their farms, which will be really interesting. But we have no real data to suggest whether or not they're improving or declining at the moment. In the National Biodiversity Data Centre, however, there's the Bumblebee Monitoring Scheme, and we've been monitoring bumblebees for nearly 10 years now across the entire country. And I suppose, unfortunately, the bigger picture is showing that bumblebees are in decline overall across the island. But, to not end on a negative, but to end on a positive, people are more aware now than ever of how important our pollinators are. And so many community organizations, farmers, schools, and even individuals, homeowners, they're all taking actions to help pollinators. And all of that data is available through the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So it is a good news story.
Brilliant.
Okay. Again, thanks to Ivan and Sorla there, and to John Brophy for giving us the background information on GLAS, and like I said, to Ivan and to Sorla on that very interesting project that's ongoing in Kildare. It'll be interesting to see the outcomes of that in the future years. So I'm being joined by my panelists here now. So can I just remind you, if you have questions, there are already some questions coming in. If you want to ask the panel a question here, use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can also use them on the Facebook platform if you're on Facebook as well. So just to kind of introduce my panel here, sorry, I should say as well, this is being recorded as well. So if you miss something at any stage, you'll be able to look this up on our Teagasc Crops YouTube channel in the coming days. So without further ado, just to introduce the panel, some of you will have met already. We have Eleanor O'Gorman there from the Department of Agriculture. You would have seen Eleanor early on. We have Phelan MacDonald and Dermot Forrestal here from Oak Park, who you would have seen earlier on the videos as well. We also have Catherine Keena there, who is our countryside management specialist. So Catherine deals with all environmental issues in the organisation. We have Mark Plunkett, who's a soils expert as well from Teagasc here in Johnstown Castle and in Oak Park as well. And we have Larry Murphy, who you would have seen earlier on as well. So I'm going to start off, Eleanor, with you, if you don't mind. First question I have here. You mentioned, Eleanor, some of the possible candidate varieties of barley. We saw the recommended list there this year. Doesn't seem to be a huge amount of change on it, but there is hope for the future. There are a couple of new varieties you think coming through that could give us something different in years to come, or something more in years to come.
Yeah, that's right, Shay. There was a number of candidates, as I said, that were coming through this year that didn't make it onto the list, but three of those in particular, Rockway, KWS Abbey and SJ Geraldine, will be trialled again this year. A couple of them, say Geraldine and Skyway, would have out-yielded Planet in 19 and 20. So there's yield potential there in those particular varieties. In terms of on the malt list, then there's two varieties that have done 2 years, SY Splendor and Tungsten. Splendor in particular was very good on lodging and node break. Also good with disease, but just to go into further detail with it, say it had the second lowest this year on protein at 10.5. There was good results with its skinning, and it did well in micro malting. So there's good potential in that variety. Tungsten, it was similar to Splendor in the likes of KPH. It was good on Rinco, but so as I said, we'll know more about those after another year in the trial, but there are a number of varieties coming through.
And just a quick question, just literally after flashing up on my screen, Eleanor, while I see it there. Any sign, we have a BYDV tolerant variety coming through in winter barley, any sign of anything like that coming through in spring barley in the near future?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't have a specific variety to mind, but yeah, I can get back to you on it.
Okay, no problem. Thanks a million for that. Larry, just moving on quickly to you. I mean, you were explaining there about seed rates and where you think guys are not getting establishment rates or not getting the plant stands adequately. Why do you think guys are not exactly getting the plant stands they want? We obviously want about 300 plants established. What are the issues you were seeing that's causing them not to get to that 300 plants per square meter? Is it seed rate, or is it, say, soil conditions at the time?
Well, sure, it's a combination of everything. A lot of farmers probably don't look at the 1,000 grain weight, for one thing. Secondly, like the weather conditions that follow post-sowing. If the conditions at sowing time are not ideal, consolidation of the seed bed, knobby, dried out seed beds, poor strike, maybe attack from crows or sowing too deep. They're all factors that govern poor seeding rates,
So really what you're saying, guys really need to be looking at what they have in front of them and adjusting their seed rates up or down based on what's there as well, and not just kind of having a one kind of size fits all seed rate for barley or for wheat or for oats at any time.
I would say to farmers, err on the safe side. Up to seed rate, seed it's around €3.40 a stone. So like it's to me, it's money well spent, and err on the safe side and don't overestimate your establishment rate, because like trying to chase a crop with low plant populations, you just can't win, no matter what you put on it.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Larry. Phil, I'm just moving quickly on to you. Very interesting piece there with Patrick Mulhall in terms of assessing the soil and looking at the soil. And quite often, agronomists, and we're all kind of guilty of it, looking at what's above the ground. Looking at what's below the ground is probably equally important. And you might just take us quickly through how you actually can do that. It's a simple process, it's not a really difficult process you were demonstrating to us there.
Yeah, Shay, really what you need to do is get your spade out. And what I do is I dig about 10 inches, 8 to 10 inches deep and about 2 feet long. And I take out all the soil out of that. And that's just an access hole, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I'll come along and I'll take my wedge of soil out from the side of that, because that puts less pressure on that piece that we're taking out. So when you take it out, then you'll try and take it out with the spade, on the spade, and you can drop it onto your plastic or your board, or whatever you're dropping it onto, and just watch the way it falls and watch the way it breaks up. And that gives you a very good early indication of what way that soil is structured. Now, every soil will be different. Heavier soils will break differently to a lighter sandy soil. Patrick's soil there that we saw looked very, very dry in a time when soils are wet in general. But that could be and is a result of the very good drainage that he has there, but also the fact that it is a lighter soil. So you'll take your test pit, you'll take a piece out from the side of that, drop it, and have a look then at your soil structure.
And do you take that from different places within the field? Phelim, do you look at a couple of different pits in the field, or is it just one enough for?
Yeah, you probably could take a couple going across the field. The interesting thing about the VES system, which is that system that we're looking at, the visual assessment of soil structure, is that it doesn't terribly well differentiate between headlands and somewhere else in the field, in the middle of the field, or on tram lines, because we're only going down about 8 inches. You can do a double dig method, which is probably a little bit more comprehensive and will give you a better idea of plough pans, compacted layers. But 1 or 2 spots across the field will give you an indication. It's certainly better than nothing. And what you're looking for really is you're looking for signs of earthworms. That's the earthworms themselves, or the burrows. You're looking at rooting to see whether it's diverse and right across the profile, or whether it's all following one little channel. That would not be a good sign. You're looking for maybe some of the residues of straw that you have chopped or previous crops. You're looking at the color of the soil. You're looking at the wetness and the drainage of the soil. And we've seen that dry soil there in a wet time. So these are all the things you're looking at. But in particular, then you're looking at the breakdown of those little PEDs, those little aggregates of soil, and whether they'll break down just with 2 fingers, with a whole hand, or whether you actually need to break it like a piece of concrete.
Yeah. So it's actually quite simple. It's quite practical how you actually can do it.
It is a very practical thing, and nobody need to have any fear of it. Just go and dig your hole, dig out the little piece that's undisturbed beside it, drop it, have a look at it, and examine it and see. And have a look at different fields would be a very good idea too.
Yeah, just there's a lot of questions, as you might understand, coming in about the strong corporation scheme. So I'm going to move on to Dermot and to Mark to a lesser extent on that as well. Obviously, we don't have the details of the scheme yet. So in terms of rate or what's going to qualify or anything like that, we just don't have those details yet. And I'm sure the department will issue them in due course. But look at the more practical aspects of it. Dermot, just to you first. I mean, you're talking about incorporating straw there, and it's as good a value, if not better, than say like farmyard manure or slurries or anything like that. Is that really the case? And does it have any impact in terms of, say, like slugs? Does it increase slug activity or anything like that? Is there things like that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think there is. Like, firstly, to answer whether it's important as good as we say there, it is, but it's all down to the rate that you're applying. how much carbon is in the product and how much is retained. The reason why slurry looked so badly on that picture there is because it's mainly water you're applying. It's not that there's anything inherently wrong. Farmyard manure, again, you're restricted in the quantities that you can put on from a nutrient point of view, but it is a good way, obviously, of recycling straw in terms of farmyard manure. But there was an interesting question there too on the chat, which related to farmyard manure, and was saying, have we any net gain in bringing it on tillage farms from a carbon in quantities in carbon in Ireland? The answer being, as long as it's going somewhere onto soil, is it good? But I would say that you get much better use of it on tillage soils because our soils tend to be deficit in carbon. So the best place for farmyard manure from a soil structural point of view, from a soil quality point of view, is on tillage farms. And also, if we keep repeatedly putting it on high carbon grassland soils, and you saw the organic matters that we had there, not as much carbon will be retained in those soils as it would be on carbon-hungry tillage soils. Yeah, finally, Shay, you mentioned there about slugs and that. Yes, you need to be careful. If there's more organic material there coming onto the soil, it's good feeding. It's good feeding for earthworms, but it also might increase slugs in some situations, but not in any huge problems.
And Dermot, while you have this floor, good few questions coming on the question there about oilseed rape and the value of oilseed rape straw. Is it much different or better than cereal straws?
Yeah, well, it's different. I mean, the yield would be better. That would be less than a winter wheat yield. And remember, the value I took there was a high yield winter wheat crop. So the amount of carbon brought into the soil depends totally on the yield and on the carbon content. The interesting thing about oilseed rape straw will have a lower yield than that winter wheat figure. The interesting thing about oilseed rape straw, though, is that it has a higher lignin content. So by having a higher lignin content, if, for instance, we're concerned about storing or sequestering carbon in the soil, that means it has a greater value in terms of that. So the carbon that comes from oilseed rape, a greater proportion of it will last longer in the soil. So it may be valued a little bit higher from that point of view.
And just in terms of, continue on with the soil and just move over to you, Mark, for a minute, in terms of the nutrient value of the straws going back on. Again, quite a lot of questions coming in about the value of it. How soon is it available? Do we need to put out extra nitrogen to help to break down the straw? And maybe what's the best fertilizer we should be using where we're incorporating straw?
Yes, Shay, there is for the straw that you chop, there is a P and K value. There's about 10% of the P that grows the crop during the year is actually in the straw. So the straw is actually quite low in P. There's somewhere around 3 or 4 kilos if you take, say, a crop of spring barley or a crop of winter wheat. The potash is quite different. There's actually a lot of potash in straw. There's about 50-60% of the K that the crop takes up during the growing season is returned in the chopped straw. So I suppose it would be important to factor that into account, Shay, when it comes to maybe picking maybe which fields do I chop. Like, you know, maybe go for the fields that maybe where, as Dermot has highlighted there, maybe soil structure issues or low in fertility, that you could look on it as sort of, you know, one way of building or putting life back into soils, as well as the biology, the structure, but the fertility as well. In terms of, I suppose, making the best of the P and K, in that it would be important to look at soil P and K levels and the fertilizer blend. You know, your normal 10-10-20s, 13-6-20s will be too strong in potash, like possibly something like maybe a 16-10-12, something along those lines to get the benefit. And, you know, once that straw is incorporated, the soil bugs start to break it down, the P and K will become very available. The K is very available, it's water soluble. So once it goes back in, it will be available there to supply the potash requirements for the following crop.
And in terms of nitrogen, do you need extra nitrogen to help to break down that straw?
Again, Shay, like I think it's important that nearly you want a cultivator in the field on the same day, and the sooner it's worked into the soil. Like, remember, there's going to be nitrogen naturally there in the soil. There'll be nitrogen there from the fertilizer we spread and during the growing season to grow that crop. So I would advocate incorporating it to a correct depth and to get it, you know, worked into the soil, to get the bacteria, the fungi, the bugs, breaking that straw down as soon as possible. I don't know, Darren, do you have any comment with regards to extra nitrogen to break it down?
Yeah, look, it's a question that has always arisen in research for a lot of time, for a long time. I think yes, theoretically, because it has a high carbon nitrogen ratio, the bugs that are breaking it down will use nitrogen. There's no doubt about that, and they'll get that nitrogen from the soil. But this only happens really in the first couple of months after straw incorporation. So in Irish soils, I think we have plenty soil nitrogen in terms to support that. As a matter of fact, the evidence in the longer term would be that we are bringing a little bit of nitrogen into the soil. Straw is about 1% nitrogen. So over a longer period of time, it's adding to the pool of organic nitrogen that should become available. So there is an issue in terms of it uses nitrogen, but there isn't any research that would say that we need to add nitrogen to support that. In other words, it's not going to be detrimental to yield. Yeah. And we had the early work in Knockbeg would have looked at straw incorporation versus non-incorporation about min-till and ploughing, and there was no significant difference there in terms of its impact on yield in that case. The incorporation of straw, that is. So I don't think there's any need for additional nitrogen as such.
Okay. And Catherine, you've been waiting patiently there in the background. Can I move over? You're mute there now. Just a question on the whole environment end of things in terms of, will arable margins be an option in the next agri-environment schemes? And there's Sorla talked about planting different trees and all that type of thing, and hedgerows and managing hedgerows. So is there any tips you can give guys in terms of what they should be planting, how they're managed, all that type of thing?
Yeah, well, I'd say just on the scheme, I'd say the main environmental scheme will be with the next RDP in 2023. And all the work we're doing up to then, like what Cyril is doing, is trying to get ready for it and make the best use of it. My arable margins are just so fantastic. They will have to be in any future scheme. There was concern there in the questions about weeds spreading out. Again, it goes back to what Cyril was talking about, planting the right species, perennials, not annuals. Even now, obviously, the bees and the pollinators need the flowers, but even the grasses are fantastic. Structurally, because they're going to be different to the rest of the field. The spiders will overwinter in the big clumps of cocksfoot. They just, the small mammals will go through it. The fact that they'll be allowed go to seed, unlike your ryegrass in a grass field, you'll have birds and everything feeding on them. So, and they're like networks for nature through a tillage farm. So I think the arable margins and the hedgerows are the two. It's to maximise, and I suppose for farmers to consider how we can get the best out of them, and probably with very little cost to the crops. But, how do we manage them? Native for everything, native trees, leave trees in existing hedges. And again, going back to the pollinators, the flowering trees, we've been good in the past about leaving ash trees, good for firewood. We must leave, without even planting, that hedge there, that even the poorishly managed hedge that we saw, if one of those sprigs was let grow up into a whitethorn tree, that alone would feed a lot, as well as improving on the height of it. Yeah,
and I think, Catherine, there's no doubt, looking down the line at what's coming down the line in terms of the next CAP reforms, there is going to be more emphasis on the environment, on pollinators and that. So it's probably fair to say farmers are going to have to farm those areas as much as nearly as their farmed areas as such.
As cleverly, yes.
As cleverly, sorry, yes, cleverly.
I agree. And I think, if farmers could be thinking now, listen to what experts like Sarala is saying, what we need, you tell us how we get it, and pollinators, there's a lot of talk about pollinators. They're only a proxy for all biodiversity, but they're a very good proxy for all biodiversity.
Okay, guys, it's 1:15. I'm up against time. I'm just going to ask a couple of quick fire questions, if you don't mind, and can you give me very short answers if you like? First one to you, Eleanor. There's been a few questions about seed availability. Not everything that we put up there on the screen is necessarily available. There were some issues, I think, with germinations and stuff like that. Any quick comment on some varieties there?
Yeah, well, any of the varieties that enter our trials, which are multiplied up by the breeders and the seed industry, they must go through the seed certification scheme. And in order to be entered onto that scheme, there's high standards that need to be high purity, a minimum of 85% germination, free from weed species. So automatically they have to go through those parameters. So if there was an issue with germination in the field, the label that's on any seed bag, all the lots have to go through that rigorous testing. So if a farmer or a grower holds onto the label on the bag, they can actually
request what the germination from that batch of seed was, but there's a minimum 85%. So that should sort out most issues there.
Okay, so they just need to talk to their merchants as well about what's actually available. There was some issues, I'm told. Quick question on the straw incorporation. As you might expect, there's a lot of questions coming in on this straw incorporation scheme and the kind of details around it. Dermot, you kind of as our machinery expert, how deep should we be incorporating them? Is there some systems better than others in terms of incorporating plough versus reduced cultivation systems?
Yeah, like they're all going to play some slightly different areas in the profile. So, you know, the depth that you go to is going to depend on what your cultivation system is. So I think any cultivation system, whether you're direct drilling, which is nothing, through to full ploughing, I think it will do a good job in terms of incorporation. But obviously, you know, you do get stratification in shallow systems where you will get the organic material in a shallower layer. But any system can be used to do that. What's critical, I think, though, is to have good straw chopping facility in the first place to get the straw evenly distributed in the first place.
Yeah, Phelim, a quick one here, just a comment here, and it's again about trading straw for taking back in dung. You mentioned something earlier on there about bringing back in problems and stuff like that. So is there a trade-off there?
Yeah, well, it works very well if you can get your own straw back in the dung. But most of the livestock farmers will be taking straw in from a number of different sources, and you don't know where they are. So that is a problem straight away, you know, that your straw has been mixed in with others and you don't know what's coming back. But other than that, it's as good a way to do it as any other. You know?
Larry,
the only other thing, Shay, I'd say there is about the scheme details. We really don't know the scheme details yet. So it does look like that it'll only be cereal straw applied in the area aid form, and hopefully we'll see the terms and conditions. We'll know a lot more.
Okay. Larry, quick one for you. I have a question here about sowing depth on spring barley. Does that have any effect on establishment, and what's the ideal sowing depth for spring barley?
We're around 2 inches. Obviously, like we do come across crops being drilled too deep and the plant just can't make it above ground. So it is important, like when you're sowing, get down and just check the depth that you're sowing at, because you know, you can sow too deep.
Yeah.
With spring barley.
Mark, quick one for you. Can you reduce the amount of fertilizer you use when you're chopping straw? Yes or no?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, Shay.
But it's over time. It's not straight away.
Well, the potash is the big one, Shay. Like that, you're putting back a lot of potash there. You know, over half of the potash that it takes to grow the crop. So I think the one to watch is decay, and it's relatively quickly available as well. It's it'll make its way back into the ground once it's incorporated.
Catherine, final one to you then, just on the environment again. Again, a lot of questions coming in about what's the best seeds to sow. It's a very difficult question to answer, I know, but in terms of wildflowers, where there's wildflower margins, have you any tips for what people should be looking for? I know Sarah mentioned native ones, but have you any in your head in particular?
Even if you start with grassy margins, the flowers will come in as well. Now, maybe some of the lighter grasses than the Coxfoot Timothy, which we did in GLAS, but even grassy margins, you know yourselves, the flowers will come. Okay,
listen. Thanks to the panelists here. I mean, there's been literally a flood of questions coming in the last few minutes. Unfortunately, we can't get to them all. We are under time constraint. Can I sincerely thank you all for your contributions? And sometimes it can be quite difficult taking these rapid fire questions when you don't see what's in front of you. So thanks for your contributions. I'd like to thank all the contributors who contributed to the videos that you saw earlier on. Thanks sincerely to all of those who contributed on that. And likewise, thanks to our technical team in the background, the people who edited the videos and who are running this webinar in the background. This just isn't the faces you can see on screen. So just before I sign off, just a kind of a reminder of a couple of upcoming events that we have over the next tillage month, as we've called it. As you know, next Thursday, if you've registered on Zoom already, we have another one of these webinars next Thursday, and we're looking at topics like Brexit and the effects it's going to have on the tillage industry. We're looking at organic manures in tillage systems and how we can maximise their use. And again, looking at what's coming down the line in terms of fertiliser use. That's something that we have to look at. And bean agronomy as well. We see that protein prices are going up all across the world. So beans might be more attractive again this year than they have been. That's at the same time. It's at 11:30 next Thursday. On this channel. If you've registered on Zoom already, as I've said before, you will get a reminder. And that Zoom registration. If you register on Zoom, you will qualify for IASIS points as well. We'll be able to send that away for IASIS points. After that, then on the 3rd of February, we have the first installment of our National Tillage Conference. Obviously, again, we can't hold that live this year. So we're doing a National Tillage Conference over 2 separate days in February. The first day is on the 3rd of February, and the second day is on the 17th of February. And the first day we're looking at research, kind of research that we're doing here in Oak Park with more medium term outcomes from that. So a lot of that will be interesting in the medium to long term in terms of where that research is going to bring us. And the second day then, which is on the 17th of February, we'll look at sort of the up-to-date and kind of more pressing issues that are out there at the moment. So it likes of septoria, it likes of weeds, all that type of things. There's more the agronomic impacts that we're looking at as well. As well as that, as you know, in February, we normally have a couple of winter crop walks. So again, we're going to have to go online for those, but we're hoping to do a similar type of webinars. What we're doing today, we're going to go out, hopefully into fields, look and see what crops are there around the country and give you a flavour for what condition crops are in from all different regions in the country. So there's 2 of those will be one on the 9th and on the 11th of February. And lastly, then at the end of the month, around I think it's the 23rd of February, we have a malting barley conference as well, and we have to finalise a few details on that as well. So with that, I'm going to say thanks again to you, the viewers, for staying in such great numbers over the last hour or so. There's some brilliant information, I think, given out there over the last hour from all our contributors. And I just invite you again to log on again on Thursday morning, where we have more of the same. Hopefully you'll get more good information from that as well. That'll be chaired by Kieran, my colleague Kieran Collins. So with that, I'm going to leave you until Thursday morning. And like we're saying to everybody at the moment in the current circumstances, stay safe. Thank you.